Today, we're telling the story of a perfectionist rock savant whose attention to detail is definitely the secret ingredient to some of the rock era's most iconic tracks. I mean, after spending 6 years working on demos in his basement, this musician, along with his band, released one of the best-selling records ever. Its lead single, it blew everybody away. Then 2 years later, these guys kicked out another blockbuster album. Only this meticulous artist, he didn't think the record was quite ready. He vowed that he would take his time with the next one. It would be 8 years before it was released. This led to a contentious legal battle with the record label. But when the LP was released, it went to #1, even though the musical landscape had completely changed. Now, with 6 studio albums to their name, this band, they kind of average about a decade between records. Get the story behind this musical mastermind and this legendary band and their evolution told through 5 essential tracks coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you remember digging inside the cereal box to find the prize back in the day, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now. Click the big red button so you always know when our latest and greatest are coming out. And also check us out on Patreon. So it's time for another episode of our series. It's kind of a new one, Evolution. This is where we tell the story of a band's career through 5 defining tracks. I mean, these may not be a band's most popular songs. They may not even be my personal favorites, but each song will take you from the beginning to the end of a band's journey and showcase the evolution of their sound and their artistic direction. For today's episode, we're telling the story of the band who saved rock and roll in the 70s. Talking about Boston. Let's get into it. The story of Boston begins with MIT master's graduate and Polaroid engineer Tom Scholz, who would of course form the band in Boston, Massachusetts in 1976. However, before Boston came together, Tom spent roughly 6 years hidden in his homemade basement studio in Watertown. This is where he tweaked and refined demo after demo, which he then shopped around to record companies, only to be rejected over and over again. During these pre-Boston years, Scholz also played in multiple bands, and in the process he met guitarist Barry Goodrow, also drummer Jim Mazdia, and vocalist Brad Delp. In 1973, Tom played in the band Mother's Milk with the trio, but they disbanded the following year. In 1974, Scholz saw his dream of becoming a professional musician begin to slip away. He'd spent so much time and money and a lot of time to make it happen, but he had nothing to show for it. Taking one last gamble, Tom Scholz cleaned out his savings account and he bought an obsolete 12-track recorder, which he installed in his basement studio. His last-ditch plan was to record 6 new demos and then sell off his equipment if his music was rejected again. Scholz played all the instruments on these demos, except for the drums, and of course Delp added the vocals. But this time there was interest in Scholz' music. It was from multiple labels and a management team called Pure Management. Through Pure, Tom and Brad courted Epic Records. They were signed to him in 1976. Epic took Boston on with the condition that the album would be re-recorded under producer supervision. John Boylan was the man chosen for that task. Now, during this process, Jim Mazdia was replaced by Sib Hashian on drums, and bassist Fran Sheehan was added as well. Epic wanted the band to re-record Scholz' demos in a professional studio, but Tom pushed back. He knew he could only get his sound by working in his own studio, so he struck a secret deal with John Boylan behind everybody's back. The pact allowed Scholz to record all the instrument tracks in his basement by himself, with Boylan getting shared producer credit. Scholz precisely duplicated 5 of the 6 existing demo cuts, working mostly by himself in the same studio exactly as he had for the demos, pretty much the same thing. Once completed, Boston's eponymous debut was released on August 25th, 1976. Definitely one of the best rock albums ever put to vinyl. Our first Evolution track comes from this LP, Foreplay / Long Time. It's been such a long time. The instrumental Foreplay is the first song that Scholz ever wrote and recorded. A lot of people don't know that. The earliest version was composed in 1969 while he was attending MIT. Said Tom about it, and I quote, I wrote it on an electric piano in my 4th floor apartment. I had enough dynamic and so forth to understand how sound can transfer through a wood floor. The 3 nurses that lived below us were extremely patient with me because I usually wrote between 12 and 2 in the morning. And every time I pounded on those keys, they felt it through the ceiling. End of quote. The first demo was cut in 1971 and was cut on a 2-track machine with Jim Mastia on drums in Mastia's basement studio. And later, Foreplay was part of that 6-song demo set that Scholz assembled in 74 to 75. But of course, you know that we can't talk about Foreplay without its counterpart, Long Time. The pair are unique in Boston's catalog as they're essentially 2 separate songs that are fused together to make up one track. Foreplay, based around a Hammond B3 organ riff, is the powerhouse instrumental intro. Of course, Long Time is the kick-ass rocker. Together, they run 7 minutes and 47 seconds, and many radio stations played this version. It's the only one you can play. Long Time in its own makes up roughly 5.5 minutes of that track. A shortened single version of just Long Time comes in just shy of 3.5 minutes. Now, Tom originally sang all the vocals on Long Time in his basement when he was making the demo, but after he invited Brad to sing, I'm sure there's no doubt who had the superior voice there, and Delp's voice is the only one heard on the 1976 studio recording. Scholz, for his part, played several guitars, including lead electric guitar on Foreplay, processed through a space pedal effect, and also acoustic rhythm guitars on Long Time. The 3 electric guitar solos on Long Time, those were played by Barry Goodrow. So usually we try to stick to 1 song per album for these evolution episodes. But you know what? For my second pick, I had to go with More Than a Feeling. But I couldn't leave Foreplay Long Time off either. This was Boston's breakthrough hit. How could we not cover it? Now, we actually talked about this one in depth last year, but a little bit more info on it. More Than a Feeling is track 1 of side 1 on their first album. It would be the world's first taste of Boston. Released as their first single in the fall of '76, it put the world of music on notice. This is what an instant rock classic sounds like, for sure. More Than a Feeling has all the key components of AOR: powerhouse guitar, soaring lead vocals, flawless harmonies, and a heavy rhythm section. It's a song about music's nostalgic power to send you back to another time and place. And in this case, to the dream of a girl, that Scholz used to know, Mary Ann. She actually is a real person. Find out who she really is after we mention our sponsor. Man, on this episode, I have Campfire Audio's Moon Rover around my neck, and they're so lightweight, I forget that I have them around my neck sometimes, but listening to them like crazy the last month. The Moon Rover is a truly unique piece of campfire history, with each piece being individually flame treated by hand to create a subtle, striking organic finish. Each color reflected on Moon Rover's titanium shells created by the gradient of temperature applied during treatment, with wonderful blues, purples, and yellows being revealed as they catch the light. After flame treatment, they are understated and rugged in one light and flush with beautiful color in the next. It's the aircraft-grade titanium used for Moon Rover that makes it so lightweight and highly durable. The durability is key for me, because I use my ear monitors all day. I also don't want to worry about them breaking when I shove them in a travel bag. Click on the link below to check out these bad boys and get your Moon Rovers to hear music like you've never heard it before. Amazing. So what Tom Scholz said about Mary Ann is, and I quote, "It was written about a fantasy event, but it's one that almost everybody can identify with, of somebody losing somebody that was important to them, and music taking them right back there. There was a real Mary Ann. She was my older first cousin, who I had a crush on when I was 10 years old. However, the song referred to in More Than a Feeling is more than a fantasy. It's actually Walk Away Renee, a 1967 pop hit by the Left Bank. Just walk Scholz worked on More Than a Feeling for 5 years before it became a Boston standard. I mean, every facet of the song was meticulously and strategically crafted by Scholz. Tom would say that More Than a Feeling was the last demo that he completed. And just a couple of weeks after Epic Records heard the song, Tom and Brad had an offer to become recording artists. There's no doubt that this was a song that made it happen. Scholz layered the guitars really carefully, with multiple electric guitars and at least one acoustic, and balancing 6-string and 12 strings, blending it all into a seamless whole. Scholz's idea to kick the song off with a fade-in is just a brilliant idea. It captures listeners right off the bat. The instrumental intro is a double track of 2 12-string guitars followed by a third acoustic guitar that doubles with the bass line and the drum snare. And then we hear the beginning of Brad Delp's incredible vocal performance, which is also double-tracked, as many of you know. His range, otherworldly. Now, if you want a detailed breakdown of Brad's vocals on this song, make sure to check out our episode that we did about 8 months ago on More Than a Feeling. The song was the hit that launched Boston's career. It was released in September of '76. More Than a Feeling climbed to number 5 of the Billboard Hot 100 and number 4 on the Cashbox chart. This song, along with Boston's debut album, it would send a seismic shock across the music industry, reviving rock in a big way and making Boston the biggest new rock band of the '70s. The LP hit number 3 on the Billboard album chart, never hit number 1 actually, but it sold over 17 million copies in the US alone. For many years, it was the best-selling debut album in history. Boston's second LP, Don't Look Back, that landed 2 years after their debut, 1978. Boston created a familiar formula with Don't Look Back, with actually, some critics dubbed it Boston Part 2. However, in all fairness, the album was only half finished at 29 minutes in length, at least according to Tom Scholz. Epic Records wasn't pleased with Tom's time-consuming approach to writing music, and they opted to rush release the album on August 15, 1978. But even though it was incomplete by Tom's standards, Don't Look Back still sold really well. It hit number 1 in the US, and it tallied over 7 million copies sold. Now, angry about pushing the album out the door, said Tom, and I quote, "It's one thing to do most of the work. I was engineering it, producing it, providing the studio, writing the songs, and recording all of the parts. I wasn't necessarily getting paid for all of that. But it was another thing to truncate my creative possibilities by deciding that we were going to stop now because they could make the most money if it was released right now. I was not done. Never again." That was Scholz's mantra. Now, we can only speculate what other sonic innovations Scholz would have come up with had he been given more time. But as it was, Don't Look Back stuck with Boston's winning sonic formula. It's a great record. That's not to say that Don't Look Back wasn't pushing Boston ahead. All right, so I know going into Boston's second album, many of you might expect that I would choose the title track, Don't Look Back. After all, it's another essential Boston anthem, characterized by all those signature attributes that come to expect from this band by now: power-packed, melodic guitars, killer vocals, and hooks to spare. But that's why I gotta go in another direction here. I need to showcase something new, showing the real evolution of Boston, that they could really do everything. So for my third pick, I'm going with A Man I'll Never Be. Man, what a great song. A Man I'll Never Be gave Boston two things that they didn't really have before. A song built around a piano and a next-level introspective lyric. This thought-provoking ballad, it's about self-doubt in a relationship and that feeling of coming up short. You look up at me and somewhere in your mind you see A Man I'll Never Be. Now, Scholz would say that the lyrics came to him in a rush after he finished the music, right after. The lyrics are a confession of inadequacy. We've all felt it. I mean, so many great lyrics in here. I can't get any stronger, I can't climb any higher, but apparently not for a lack of trying. As Tom also wrote the line, "You'll never know just how hard I've tried." Once again, Brad Delp is on vocals, lead and backing. Siv Hashian is behind the drum kit, and Tom Scholz takes care of pretty much everything else: guitars, organ, and piano. However, since he was unable to squeeze a piano into his basement, Tom traveled 10 miles to a studio in Maynard, Massachusetts. Their engineer Dave Butler recorded Tom on the house piano. And I can't climb any higher. A Man I'll Never Be. It definitely upends your expectations about this band, about Boston. It's a serious change of pace from Boston's debut album. A Man I'll Never Be was released as Don't Look Back's second single on November 2nd of '78. It broke into the Billboard Top 40. It reached number 31. Should have been higher. Features one of Brad Delp's most heartfelt vocals. I mean, the way he expresses Tom's words, just enthralling. It's a really special song. So coming in at number 4, our fourth evolution track, we have the power ballad extraordinaire, Amanda. Written and produced entirely by Tom Scholz, the man. He got to work on this one clear back in 1980, after the completion of Boston's Don't Look Back tour. Amanda was the first song Scholz wrote for Third Stage. Said Scholz, and I quote, "I must admit that when I started it, there was a motivation to show that I could do it again, strictly on ego motivation. But once I got Amanda done, I felt I had to complete the album in a way that would do justice to that song because I wasn't expecting it to work out that well. It set a standard for everything else that I had to do." End of quote. Amanda would be the gold standard for Third Stage. And this time around, Tom was prepared to take his time in shaping the album's other tracks to match it. After Don't Look Back, he vowed not to rush out another album. He was going to do it on his terms. He stuck to his guns. And as you can imagine, this did not go over well with Epic Records, and a contentious breach of contract lawsuit ensued. It would be a long 8 years between Boston's second and third albums. A lifetime if you're a band trying to make it in music. But the war with Epic was just one of the obstacles that prevented Boston from releasing their third LP. There was also a flood that damaged the studio and a massive power outage to contend with, and the band members themselves grew tired of waiting on Tom's painstaking precision. Actually, by 1981, Goodrow, he'd had enough. He released a solo album before quitting to form Orion the Hunter. Sheehan and Hashian, they also departed 1983. To keep busy, Brad Delp accepted session work, including side projects with Barry Goodrow. It was kind of a disaster. Even Tom was exhausted. Said Scholz, and I quote, "It took 6 years to produce Third Stage. When I first started working on the project, I'd put in 50 to 60 hours a week. During the last 2 years, I really had to drive myself to go down to the basement and finish it." Now, the ongoing lawsuit between Scholz and Epic reached a boiling point in early 1984. Exasperated by the delays in delivering Third Stage, Epic inflicted every tactic that they could think of to force Tom Scholz to finish this record. That included freezing Boston's royalties from their first 2 albums. Scholz, however, he held out for the verdict, and Boston emerged the winner. As for Amanda, you may be wondering if Scholz named the song after a real person. This time he didn't, actually. He chose the name because it fit well within the song's lyrical structure. Amanda and Third Stage represented a new era for Boston. Sure, the music was fueled by Tom's purist approach of using old traditional rock and roll equipment. I mean, yeah, Scholz detested computers and he wouldn't be caught dead using a synthesizer, believe me. However, there were some notable modernizations on this album. For example, Third Stage was the first record to showcase Scholz's genius invention, the Rockman guitar processor. Rockman came as a result of Scholz's constant experimentation with guitar amplifiers and microphones and equalizers. I mean, this guy was always exploring. Scholz's electronic box gave musicians the ability to modify the sound of guitars and other instruments. Definitely revolutionized the recording business.
If I tell you today, will you turn me away?
Now, throughout the verses of Amanda, we hear a chiming effect, like the sound of church bells. It gave the arrangement a gentle, touch-romantic sensitivity. That chiming, it was another example of Tom Scholz's technical wizardry. I talk a lot about Brad Delp in the past, but Tom Scholz, he's a genius. That effect was created by the alteration of the sound of an electric guitar plugged into the Rockman. Scholz played every single instrument on Amanda, which includes 12-string guitar, lead guitar, bass guitar, Hammond organ, electric piano, grand piano, drums, and even unidentified flying objects, which is said in the liner notes. Actually, though, by the time third stage was completed and Amanda was released as a single, a lot of people had already heard it, or at least an unfinished version of it. Said Delp, and I quote, "A bootleg of Amanda got released 2 or 3 years before the record came out. At first, we thought it was going to be a disaster, but in a backhanded way, it turned out to have a somewhat positive effect. The band realized that on every radio station that had a copy of Amanda, it was the top requested song. Of course, Boston's new label, MCA, made sure that it didn't stay out too long. It was reassuring to the band that they'd been missed in their absence. The comeback was definitely on. Amanda and Third Stage were both finally released in September of '86. Both of them went to #1. 8 years couldn't diminish the public's love for this band, Boston. Man, the album went on to sell 4 million copies just in America. So now we're going to fast forward through a few albums to get to our last Evolution track. In true Tom Scholz fashion, it would be another 8 years between studio albums as Third Stage's follow-up Walk On wasn't released until June 7th, 1994. This would actually be the only Boston album that Brad Delp didn't appear on. Instead, Fran Cosmo would cover the vocals. Then it would be another 8 years before Boston released their 5th album called Corporate America, and that was in November of 2002. This one, which featured a slew of vocalists from Brad Delp to Fran Cosmo to Anthony Cosmo and Kimberly Dame. Then on March 9th, 2007, a tragedy struck. Brad Delp, depressed and beyond reconciliation, he took his own life at his New Hampshire home, and he was only 55. A tribute concert was performed on his behalf the following August, held at the Bank of America Pavilion in Boston. It was called Come Together, a tribute to the life of Brad Delp. The group played a benefit show in his honor, uniting all surviving members of the band. About 5 years later, in 2013, Boston issued their 6th and final studio, to date at least, entitled Life, Love, and Hope. It had been 11 years since the release of Corporate America, even longer than their 8-year consistency. Much of the album consisted of retreads. Once again, it incorporated multiple vocalists, including Brad Delp, who was now singing from beyond the grave. One of these posthumous Brad Delp tracks is my 5th Evolution pick, the Scholz Delp swan song, Sail Away.
Each wasted day, hope never sail away.
Like I said, Scholz and Delp had recorded material previously that hadn't made it onto an album, and Sail Away was one of these tracks. So Tom Scholz said about Sail Away and the rest of Brad's vocals on the album, and I quote, "These were songs that he and I had worked on with the thought that they would be released at some point. There was never any thought in my mind that I wouldn't put them on the album. And I'm sure that Brad would be very happy to know that they went on an album called Life, Love, and Hope," end quote. This song, the lyrics speak to the world we live in now, right now. And man, hearing Brad Delp's haunting vocal when he sings, "Sometimes I hide the feelings I'm going through. You can lie, you know no one cares." Man, I truly wish that Brad knew how much we all cared. How much his music and his perfect voice has meant to us and still means to us every day.
But you know, no one cares.
You know, I've thought about this for the last couple of years. And I've come to this conclusion about Boston and their music. had they been able to release a few more records at their peak, I think they'd be uttered in the same sentence as Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd. Truly. And actually, even though they only released 3 albums in their peak years, the big 3 or 4 songs from those albums are still played as much as any band from the classic era. It's true. They saved rock and roll during the disco era when it was fumbling. They had the biggest selling debut album ever for a long time. And as I said before, More Than a Feeling may be the greatest one-song vocal performance in the history of rock and roll. Guess what? They are not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's okay. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame isn't worthy of them. All right, so there it is, my pick for the 5 defining tracks that tell the story of Boston's evolution as a band. What do you think? Are these the 5 songs you would choose to tell Boston's story? If you disagree, give me your 5 Boston tracks in the comment section below. Let's have a great discussion about one of the greatest bands ever. To me, they should have been first ballot Hall of Fame. Guns N' Roses was put in, and they had one big album, I guess a couple, but I think it's a similar story to Boston. Let's have a discussion about that below. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe below. Till next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.